Hey coders, hope you're having an amazing day. This is MySQL tutorial that you have chosen in the poll I created a couple of weeks ago. Thank you everyone for your votes as well as for your comments and subscriptions. Shout out to the new members of the channel, Charisse, Svetlana and Oliver Carson. Thank you so much guys for your support. Much appreciated. You might want to check out my SQLite and PostgreSQL tutorials, and to follow more tutorials coming, make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell to get notifications for latest videos. Now with that being said, let's get started. This tutorial will give you a quick start to MySQL and make you comfortable with the syntax and core concepts. In fact, MySQL syntax is very straightforward, and by the end of this video, you will discover that all the fuss about MySQL is about nothing. To start off, you will need to download MySQL Workbench from the link I left you in the description section below. And if you want, you can only download MySQL Server and use SQL Tools extension in VS Code and run your queries in your favorite IDE, as I know the majority of you guys uses VS Code as their go-to IDE. But before start learning the syntax, let me have 2 minutes of your precious time and tell you what is SQL and what is MySQL, just to eliminate the confusion. SQL is an abbreviation for Structured Query Language, but you probably know that already. SQL is the standard language for Relational Database Management Systems, or RDBMS for short. RDBMS is a system software that creates, reads, updates, and deletes data from your databases. And the word relational pertains to the relation between two or more tables in your database. SQL does exceptional job in handling relations between different tables in your database. On the other hand, MySQL is the most popular relational SQL database management system. In other words, MySQL and other systems like PostgreSQL or SQLite all are implementations of the structured query language. MySQL powers big names like YouTube, the platform you're using now to watch tutorial videos, CMS like WordPress, or giant travel agencies like Booking.com, and other great names like Twitter, Amazon, and Shopify. MySQL is one of the best implementations of SQL being used for developing web-based software applications. It's created by Oracle and written mainly in C++ and C languages. It's also worth noting here that MySQL runs on the web as well as on the server. It's fast, reliable, and easy to use, and the great thing about MySQL that it's open source. The data in a MySQL database is stored in the form of tables. A table is a collection of related data, and it consists mainly of rows and columns. To recap, the difference between SQL and MySQL is that SQL is the standard language for retrieving and manipulating structured databases. On the other side, MySQL is a relational database management system. So we can say now that SQL is the language and MySQL is the implementation of that language. Also, we have SQL Server, Oracle, or IBM DB2, which is used to manage SQL databases. Let's talk a little bit about databases. So a database is composed of different tables related to each other. It could be 2 tables or more. And each table is composed of rows and columns. Rows has also another synonym, records. Also columns has another synonym, which is fields. Each row represents a record in that table, and each column represents the field or the property in the respective rows. You can think of it as if SQL databases look like Excel spreadsheets but on steroids. In Excel, you can use basic lookup functions to look up some data. You can Control F as well, but at the end of the day, the options are limited. However, in MySQL, you can actually query data by writing statements to retrieve exactly what you're looking for. That's why MySQL is very flexible in searching and filtering data. You will find in the description a gist for a cheat sheet of 95% of MySQL statements you will ever gonna use as a future database admin. Now you can secure your financial future and work for a huge corporation as a DBA for 75 grand a year. Now that you know these nuances, time to get your hands dirty and explore more practically MySQL syntax. But just one last thing, don't forget that you will need to install MySQL Workbench. The installation is very straightforward. Don't forget to set up your admin password because you will need it each time you will log in on your Workbench. And this is where we're going actually to write our code and examine our databases. Alright, so let's go ahead and start by creating a database inside our MySQL Workbench. So what I want to do now is to create a file, create a new SQL tab for executing queries. So go ahead and click that. Let me just zoom in a little bit for you guys to see better. Before creating databases, I would like to show you the multiple line comments and a single line comment. So for a multiple line comment, you will need to enter /* and then */. The same as you would do in Rust, Java or Kotlin, even assembly language. I believe the multiple line comment is written using the /**/. And for a single line comment is just double dashes followed by a space and then your comment. Alright, so to create a database is very straightforward. We will use the create database statement and then followed by the name of the database. In this case, I'm going to deliberately call it DB test. And following that is a semicolon. If you will not enter the semicolon when you're going to execute your query, you will get an error. The semicolon actually tells MySQL that this is the end of the statement, and what follows after that in the separate line is going to be a new statement. So to execute this create database statement, you will need to get up here. So we have this lightning bolt icons. One that can execute the whole script, and the other one, which my favorite one, actually execute the statement which is under the keyboard cursor. So if you will put the cursor here and you will get up here and you will click that, it has been executed. We can't see anything yet here in the schemas, but once you refresh the schemas, you'll find that your DB test has actually been created. We don't have any tables in this database, but that's okay, because what I want to do next actually is to delete this database. Now, this is actually something that you would never ever do in real life, unless you accidentally have created this database just by error, and you want to delete it or drop it from your schemas. But before I show you the delete, there is also one statement that it's very important for creating a database. Create, and by the way, the statements or the MySQL keywords could be written in uppercase and also could be written in lowercase. It's actually could be written in a mix of upper and lower cases. So the statement that I want to show you is called create database. Nothing has changed here. If not exists, and then follow that is the name of the database you want to create. So this is another way to create a database. And as you can understand from this statement, that it creates only if this database does not exist in your schemas. Now, to delete a database, you will enter the statement or the command called drop database followed by the name of that database. And just to show you that it will work, if you will type the statement using lower cases, now if I will execute this command, you can see clearly here that it has disappeared. Likewise, for create database if not exists, you can also do drop database if exists and the name of the database. So let's put DB test, and as this database is already deleted, if I will execute that statement, nothing actually will change. Now let me actually create that database again, because I want to show you how to create different tables inside the database. And as we said that a database could be composed of 2 or more tables. And these tables are related together, and we're going to see how. So let's create that one more time. All right, let's refresh. Now it has been created again. Now what I want to do is I want to create a table. To create that table, you will enter the statement create table like you would do with the database, followed by the name of the table. So let me call it table test. open, close parentheses, and don't forget the semicolon. And inside here, in between the parentheses, we will need our different columns. So let's have our first column. For example, let's call it test underscore column. This test column, I want it to be an integer, a whole number. And actually in SQL in general, there are a lot of data types. And I'm going to leave a link to a cheat sheet for all the data types used in MySQL. As you can see on the screen, these different pages contain different data types, and you don't have to memorize them all, but you need to just understand which data type consists of what, so you can utilize them based on your own needs. So this test column is of type integer. Now let's go ahead and create that table. All right. If we'll go here, nothing yet happened, because we will need to tell MySQL that I want to use that database DB set, and then I want to create a table inside it. To do that, I will use the statement use and the name of your database. So DB test, like this, and go ahead and execute that statement. Now you can see here that DB test became black, darker black, right? So that means that it has been selected or actually used by MySQL. Now let's go ahead here and make like that to execute it. And if we refresh, immediately you will find that inside our tables, we have created one table called table test, right? And inside it, we have only one column, which is called test column, which is right here of data type integer. All right, so this is so far the only column that we have in our table. Let's say, for instance, that we want to describe the details of a table. What you can do here is enter the statement describe and the name of the table that you want to describe. In our case, it's table test, and we'll execute that. And we'll find here that we have a result grid that has appeared. We have the field, the type, null, key, default, and extra. We have only one column, which is test column, and you can find that field is the same synonym for column as we said. Data type integer, null, which means that it could be empty because we haven't actually entered a constraint to be not null. So this is, we will see it just in a few seconds. Key, default, and extra. So we can have a very clear description of the table that we have created. Now let's say that I want to modify the table after actually I've created one column here. Let's say that I want to add another column. I can't just come here and add a column and make create table. It won't work. But instead what I can do is I can use one statement called alter table. This is actually going to modify the table, adding columns or even dropping columns if you want. So what you can actually do is typing alter table followed by the name of the table. In our case, table test. So this is actually telling MySQL I want to modify the table test. What will come after could be addition or subtraction of columns. So we want to add another column of data type varchar, and varchar is the string in MySQL, and varchar takes maximum of 255 characters, which means 8 bits, which is equal to 1 byte. Now let's save that and let's go ahead above and execute that statement. Now let's refresh, and immediately we can say that MySQL has indeed added another column to our table test. Let's go ahead now and actually try to alter the table test to delete this another column that we've just added, right? So to do that, we will say drop another column and we'll come here, execute statement, refresh, and you can find that it has been removed. Alright, so all of that was a quick introduction for what we're going actually to do next. Welcome back. Now we're going to simulate creating booking.com database. There is one important statement that I didn't mention earlier, and this statement simply shows all the databases that are available in our schema. So I'm going to execute this statement and let's see what we will get. Great, we have all our databases. Perfect. So now that you know how to create a database, let's go ahead and create our database called booking_company. Let's execute this statement. Let's refresh, and we get booking_company created. Perfect. What I want to do next is I want to set this booking_company as the default or the current database. To do that, I will use the statement use followed by the name of the database, in our case booking_company. You can see that booking_company is marked with black color, I mean darker black color. There is one important statement that it's actually showing the default database if you don't know what it is, which is select database. Execute that. And it will show you that the selected or the default database currently is booking_company. Also, there is one statement that shows the create database statement. You say show create database booking company. All right, and if we'll execute this statement, you will get here two columns, the database and create database. Maybe this is not very useful to you, but it's good to know what is possible out there. The name of the database is booking_company, and create database statement is the same that we have typed here above. Create database booking_company. All right, cool. Let me just close the result 3 and concentrate on creating our first table in our booking company database. To create a table, we have seen this before. You will say create table. We want the guests table, and the guests table will have different columns. So the first column will be the ID, and this of course will be of integer type. We want actually to add an extra layer of validity, just to say that this ID could not be null, should be entered. We should have a value for ID. And to put this constraint, we will type not null. What if we will add more records? So ID will start, let's say, from number 1. Then if we will add a new record or a new row, I don't want to write 2, then 3, then 4, and so on. I want this ID to be auto-incrementing. And here we have a very useful property called auto-increment. The second column in our guests table will be name. So we want the name of the guest, and this will be of type var_char. It's going to be a string, right? It's going to hold 255 characters in that var_char. Because it's not fixed, it could vary from small to big amount of characters. That's why we set 255 as the maximum length. And I will set this also to be not null, which means the name should always have a value. It cannot be left empty. Next, I want the email of the guest, and again, it's going to be of type var_char 255. Also, I want the reservation date. So we'll have a reservation date for each guest, and this will have a data type of date. And the date, the format of the date, usually it's, let me just put it here as a comment. Usually it's the year, then the month, then the day. Also, I would like to have the country code of each guest. So this is another column called country code, and this will be of type char. We can hold here 3 characters. So sometimes the country code could be of 3 letters, for example, USA or United Arab Emirates, UAE, or it could be 2 numbers only. For example, Poland, PL, France, FR, and so on. I'm almost done with my columns, except that this ID here is going to be the primary key in our table. This is going to be the unique or the primary key through which we can connect to other tables in the database. So this ID is our primary key, and I will type primary key right here, and I will open and close paren, and inside I will type the ID. So the ID is the primary key in our guests table. Let's now enter some values inside that table. To enter values in a table in MySQL, you will need to enter the statement insert into followed by the name of the table, in our case, guests. The order here is very important. So we will start by name, email, reservation date, and then country code. Notice that I didn't mention anything about the ID because we set it to be auto increment. And in this case, I won't have to enter the ID manually inside the table. So let's go ahead and type those columns: name, email, reservation date, and country code. I want to insert into guests table the following values. So our first name or our first guest is John, followed by comma, not semicolon. The same thing here, I forgot to mention that inside creating the table inside here, the columns are separated by commas and not semicolon. Semicolon is more globally. It just separates between each statement and the other. And as I didn't finish insert into, I didn't type here a semicolon because there is a continuation. And then after here, I'm going to have a semicolon. The next value, I need the email. Next, I want the date. And next, the country code. All right, let's go ahead now. And actually, we haven't executed the create table guests yet. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's refresh. And we have our guests here. Perfect. So inside the guests, the columns, we have the ID, the name, the email, the reservation date, and the country code. Now let's go ahead and execute the insert into guests statement. Now to query data in MySQL is very straightforward. What we want to do actually is we want to select everything inside the guests table. So the way to do that is just to type select everything, and everything in MySQL is represented by the asterisk sign. So I want to select all or everything from the guests table. All right, and let's go ahead and execute that. Perfect. We have everything in order: ID, name, email, reservation date, and country code. The values are well placed under each column. This is great, but in real life you won't display all data in the table. Instead, you would want to limit the search to some extent, but more on that later. Now I want to add more values to the guests table. So I've prepared some names here. Brigitte with her email, date of reservation, and the country code. Same for Tarek, Ajit, and Mariusz. Now let's go ahead and execute that statement. We will get here down below and select everything from the guests table. Now you see how MySQL works. You create database, you create a table, you insert values, and you query the data that you have entered. You select everything from the table. You will limit to some extent. You might want to select the first two, the first three, or the last two, or the last three. MySQL is great that it allows you to do such flexible queries. If I want to return the first two records in the database, so what you will do is you will type select all from the guests table. So you will use the limit clause to limit the search. And if you want to return the first two, as we said, you can type 2. If you want 3, you will type 3, and so on. So let's go ahead and run that query. And you will find that you have got in the results the first two records in your guests database. You can also display a specific column. So let's say that I want to retrieve the name and the email columns. Simply what you will type is select name and email from the guests table. All right, execute, and there we go. We have a list of all names and the corresponding emails. Another nice feature in MySQL is that you can rename your columns just to be more developer friendly. So we can use aliases for this. So let's say for instance that I want to change the ID to be guest_ID. So you will type select ID, and this is the default name for the ID column that MySQL gives you. So you will say select ID, and you will follow that by the as clause, and following the as clause, the name of the column that you wish to have. I want to name this column guest ID, guest_ID. All right, so this will be an alias to the ID. It's not going to change the name of the column entirely, but I will use it just to refer to the ID column. Also, I want to name as guest name, so guest_name from guests. So you're selecting ID and name, but you're giving them aliases, guest_ID and guest_name from guests table. Let's go ahead and execute this statement and see what we will get. We have successfully created guest_ID and guest_name aliases. Alright, great. In the next part, we're going to create a new table, which is going to be the reservations table. Stay tuned. Now let's go ahead and create the reservations table. To do that simply, we'll repeat the same statement. Create table with the name of that table. In our case, it's reservations. Open close paren and a semicolon. And we will need different columns here. So in fact, I can take this, copy it, and paste it down here below, as it will be the exact same ID properties. We would like to have the room number, right? So let's have the room number, and this will be of type integer, and we also want to force that constraint of not null. So the room number should not be empty. And in the hotels, sometimes you have smoking room and non-smoking room. So I want to create this column of room type, and this will be of type varchar or varchar if you prefer. Again, 255 characters. Again, pushing this constraint of not null. And then I need the guest ID. Well, the guest ID can be located in the guests table. That ID number is actually the primary key. So this primary key will be the foreign key in the reservations table. Let me show you how to do it. So let's get back to our reservations table and let's create guest ID column. So this guest ID also of type integer and not null. So again, as we did in the guests table, we said that the primary key here is the ID, and that's the ID of the reservations table. So what we're doing is that we are referencing in the reservations table the guest ID in the guests table. So in this case, the guest ID is going to be the foreign key. So let's type that, foreign key, and in this case, it is the guest ID. So now we have two keys. We have the primary key, which is the ID of that table. And we have a foreign key, which is the guest ID. We need to tell our foreign key what table it references. And in our case, it's the guests table. So that foreign key here will be referencing to the guests table. So references and the name of the table, and inside here we need the primary key in the guests table, which is the ID. Alright, I hope this makes sense to you. So now if you will try to delete a guest from the guests table that actually has active reservation in the reservations table, we will get an immediate error. And this error will say that we have a reservation for this guest in the guests table. Hence, we cannot delete him or her from our records. Alright, I hope this is clear for you and makes sense, guys. Let's say that I've forgotten to add another column in the reservations table. Do you remember how to do it? Exactly. You will type the statement alter table and then the name of that table. And then we can add, or we can drop, or we can even rename. You can do that simply by just typing rename column. And let's say that I want to change the room underscore type to let's make it camel case. Let's say room type like that. All right, and it will do it. So let me actually show you. All right, let's refresh, and nothing happened because I will need to use this database booking underscore company. Let's do it like that. Okay, perfect. Now you can see that it's dark or getting darker. Actually, we haven't created the reservations table yet, so let's go ahead and do that. All right, so you can see that the create table reservation statement is successfully executed. Perfect. Now let's refresh our schemas. And now we have in the tables, we have the guests and the reservations. And in the columns of the reservations, we have ID, room number, room type, and guest ID. And as we haven't executed the alter table yet, let's do that. All right, and you can see down here below in the output table, the alter table reservations is successfully executed as this, it has the green mark, which means that's successful. If you will have this red button or red cross, that means that it's not successful and there is an error in your syntax, most probably. All right, let's refresh. And you will find that room type has been changed. We can do that again and return it as it was. So I'm going just to switch it. All right, execute. Okay, successful. Refresh, and it has returned back to room underscore type. Also, you can delete a column. So we will use also the alter table reservations, and instead of rename, you will type drop, then drop column and the name of the column. In our case, we want to drop, for instance, the room underscore type, but I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to put this as a comment just for your reference. All right, sweet. Now we have our reservations table. We need to do the same as we did with the guests table. I need to enter some values or enter some columns, right? So we're going to say insert the name of the table, which is reservations. Again, we need to be very careful with the order. So the order here is room number, room type, and guest ID. Okay, these are the three columns that we have. Plus the ID, which is auto increment. We don't need to add it manually, as we said before. Okay, perfect. And we need the values now. So we will need several records or several rows. The first row will have the room number of 01. And we want the type of the room to be smoking. And the guest ID will be number 2. Number 2 here is going to be Brigitte. And we can also organize this a little bit. So we can do like that just for readability. And let's add also some rows. All right, I realized that we haven't included John. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I might have made a mistake, so let's make it like that. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All right, so let's go ahead and execute this statement. Let's check out in the output. All right, great. Insert to is successful. Now let's go ahead and query that. So we'll say select all from reservations. I want to query all the data that we have entered actually in the reservations table. No filters yet. So let's execute this statement. And there we go. All right, perfect. We can also apply some filters. Let's say select the room type from, just to be consistent, from the reservations. Right, execute, and we will get the room type only. Let's say, for instance, that we have double values, so the values are double. To query the unique data, there is one statement called select distinct room type from reservations. This statement actually has retrieved the unique values, right? Smoking or non-smoking. One more cool thing you can do in the statements, let's check out in the guests table. You can actually query data, you can actually query names by order. So you have the alphabetical order, A, B, C, D, and so on. So let's say, for instance, that we want to order or retrieve data by ascending order. You can do both ascending or descending, but by default, if you will not precise which order you want it to be, ascending or descending, MySQL will display in an ascending order. So let's try that. So let's go here below. Let's actually make it up just to not mix things. So let's say, for instance, that we want to retrieve data by ascending order. So what you will do is you will select all from guests table and then order by, and whatever the property you want to order by, you can choose it. But because it's more clear if we will choose by name, so we will do it by name, right? Like that. So let's go ahead and execute this. And there we go. You can see that it starts from Ajit, then Brigitte, John, Mariusz, and then Tarek. And if you will do it ascending, it's the same thing. So let's execute that and we'll get the same exact result. You will do the same thing, but instead of ASC, you will do DSC, DESC. Okay, and then execute. And there we go. It's in a descending order. T, M, J, B, then A. Okay, you can do the same thing with the emails if you want, right? Okay, so you can see here A, Tariq, then B, Ajit, J, P, and S. All right, so you get the idea. You can, it's very flexible. You can select, filter, and order as you like. We haven't seen group yet. We'll see group later when we will be introduced to the join statements. Okay, perfect. Let's get back to our reservations table. Let's say, for instance, that I don't like this, how it looks so much. Maybe we can do this. All right, this looks better. Let's say, for example, that room number 014 is a smoking room, and we actually have made a mistake in the room type. We want to change that. We want to set this room 014 to be a smoking room. So what you will need to do actually is you want to update the reservations table, and you want to set the room type smoking. And now you want to choose the second room, the second ID. Well, you can use here the where clause. When you will start to use the where clause, you will feel that you are actually programming. Although MySQL is a query language, not a programming language, but nevertheless, you will feel that you're programming. So I'm saying that I want to update the reservations table. I want to set the room type to smoking, where ID is equal to number 2. Okay, this room, 014. All right, so you're updating the reservations table and you're setting the room type to be smoking, where the ID is equal to. All right, so pretty straightforward. Let's go ahead and execute this. Perfect. Now let's select everything from reservations table and let's execute that and see what happened. Indeed, the second room with room number 14 has changed from non-smoking to smoking. All right, so this is how you update the column or the field. There is also one statement, but I don't think that you will use it ever. This statement destroys everything inside your database. It basically deletes it without deleting the database itself. So if you will type truncate table reservations execute button, now if you will refresh, you will find that if we will select everything again, we will not find anything. You see, it's empty. All right, so I don't think that you will ever going to use this statement, but it's good to know that there is such a statement that can destroy everything in your database. So let's go ahead and insert everything again. So, and let's select everything again, and we have set all data one more time, and let's update this like we did. Let's select again, and we have set the second room to be smoking again, right? So I'm going to just put a comment here: destroys all data in your database. So we have seen the where clause. The where clause is very useful in filtering huge amount of data and returning exactly what you want to query. So let me show you some examples. So let's say that we want to query all the smoking rooms in our database. We can do that simply, right? So you can say select all from reservations, where room type is equal to smoking. Let's query that, and there we go. We have the rooms 1, 14, and 43. They are smoking rooms. You can use also greater than, equal to, or less than operators. So just to show you, if we'll take this, we'll do like that. We want to select the rooms with the room numbers greater than 1, for instance, even if that doesn't make so much sense, but yeah, why not? Let's try it. We want to select all from reservations where room number is more than 1. Let's execute that, and we will get 14, 21, 43, and 37. If we want less than 21, for instance, can do that as well. And there we go. Room number 1 and 14. All right, so we have options for greater than, less than, and equal to operators. SQL also allows you to look for data not by specific keyword like we did, but by a pattern. So let's say here that we want to return any name that starts with a T letter. So the query that you're going to type is select all from the guests table, where name, you can't do like that. You can say like this, because MySQL will search in the name field and it will not find the T. So instead of that equal sign, you will type like. So you want that name to be like the T, or starts or ends with, or to be in the middle. There are a lot of options. So if I want the name to start with the T letter, you will type between double quotes the letter that you want, followed by ampersand. And don't forget the semicolon. Now let's go ahead and execute that statement, and we get Tariq indeed. You want to change the name to be email? No problem. Let's do that. Execute. We get nothing. Let's change the letter to be A. Let's execute, and we get again Tariq. Let's make it B, for instance. We get B Ajit. You can also make it not only the first letter, but you can have it inside letters. So one letter between letters. So let's make it like this. And instead of the email, let's make it name again. Let's execute that statement. And we get two results. We get John and Ajit, because the J, it's in the beginning of John, and Ajit, the J is between the A and the I. Let's say double T, for instance. We will get Brigitte, because there are double T in Brigitte. You can also use the operators and or. Let's say, for instance, that we want to choose the name. So let's actually write it. Select all from the guests table, where I want the name to include two letters, E, K, or the country code to be PL. Okay, let's get back to our query. So maybe I can do like this. All right. So where name like exactly, then inside single quotes, we will have double ampersand. And in the middle, we said we want EK, right? So EK, or the country code, country underscore code, to be equal to PL. Let's go ahead and execute this statement, and there we go. Indeed, we have two results, Tariq and Mariusz. So this is OR. If the name is like that, or the country code is equal to that, return whatever true. If one of them or both of them. In our case, we have returned both of them. So if I know for a fact that we don't have anything like this, just to show you the difference. So in this case, as this condition evaluates to false and this condition evaluates to true, we got only one result, which is the true here, Mariusz. And as this is false, then we didn't get any more results. Now, let me actually show you the AND. So I will take the same lines of code and I will say, I want the name to have double T. So I want the name to have double T and the country code to be France. So this is an enforcing condition. I will need to have both true. So I want the name to include double T and the country code to be FR. And if you will execute that, you will get Brigitte. But if you will enter anything else and you will execute, you will get nothing. Because we said that to get a result, both conditions should evaluate to true. Otherwise, we will not get anything. Let's say, for instance, that we want to return the numbers between 1 and 37. It's pretty straightforward. You want to select all the numbers between 1 and 37, everything. If you will do like that, there we go, between 4 and 21. To delete a record, you will simply delete from, then the name of the table, reservations, where ID is equal to whatever, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's say the last one, where ID is equal to 5, for instance. Let's actually delete that record. And you can see here that the 5th row has been deleted. In the next part, we're going to see how we can connect two tables using the join statement. Stay tuned. Alright, welcome back. Now we're going to connect our two tables, the reservations and the guests tables. And to do that, we're going to use the join statement. Join is very important in your SQL job, as it allows you to show the relation between two tables. Join actually joins two different columns, and it's like extending both columns and mixing them together. All right. So instead of having only one table of reservations, you will have the reservations and the guests all together in one big table. So before doing that, I want just to show you, just to refresh your memory. This is the reservations table, right? And this is here the guests table. Yeah, nothing new here. So let's say now that we want to return all the records or the rows that have matching values in both tables, in the guests and the reservations. So what you can do is to select everything from. So be careful now that we will have two tables, right? One table usually on the left and the other one on the right. The one that you're going to choose first is going to be the one on the left. So if you're going to choose the reservations table, this is going to be the left table. Now what you will do is to join the other table, which is the guests table. So this is going to be on the right side. So now you are selecting everything from reservations table and then join the guests table on the primary key of the guests table. In our case, if you remember, we had the ID, which is set to be the primary key. And in the reservations table, we had the guest underscore ID, which is the foreign key. And it's also referencing towards the ID in the guests table. So this is the inner join, and inner join basically connects both tables using common columns. All right. So we have inner join, we have left join, we have right join, and we have outer join. So you have selected everything from reservations, join guests on the guests.id. So that's the primary key in the guests table. And we want to return the corresponding values in the reservations table dot guest ID. All right, so I think it's clear now that we are connecting both tables using the primary key in the guests table, here the right one, and the common in the reservations table dot guest ID. All right, so let's execute this query and see what we get. So you get the primary key, which is the ID inside the reservations table. You get the room number, the room type, and the guest ID, which is the foreign key inside the reservations table. And then connecting with the primary key in the guests table, which is the ID right here. So you see, both they are intersecting together. So both tables, the one on the left, as we said, the reservations, right? This was the one on the left, and the one on the right, which is the guest table. So both here actually This is the intersection between both tables. And then you get the name, the email, the reservations date, and the country code. Now, I think you can imagine what the left join does. It returns all the records from the left side or from the left table and the matched records from the right table. Okay, so again, we'll say select all from reservations, and then you will say, instead of inner join or join, you'll say left join guests on the guests.id, which is equal to the guest_id. All right, let's execute this query. So we've got the ID, the room number, the room type. So we're actually joining the left table with the right table based on the left table or the reservations table. If you will do it differently, you will get a different output. It's basically flipped. So let me just show you. If let's say that we're going to use the guests table as the left side. So let's actually take this and let's change that to guests. Let's change the right table to reservations on guest ID, and we will leave it the same. All right, we'll execute this query and we'll get different output, right? So we have got here the primary key, the ID, the name, the email, reservation date, then the country code, right? So we have stopped actually in the guests table in like here. This is the first table, right? So you can see on the fifth row inside the reservations table on the right, we don't have a fifth row. If you remember, we have dropped it. We have deleted this fifth row. But even though we have dropped it, the join statement, the left join statement, has actually returned this row corresponding to the fifth row inside the guests table. And this is actually a right join but flipped. Like if you will do select all from reservations right join guests on guests ID equal to you will get the same exact result. So just to show you what I mean, so that's the right join. We will take like that, reservations, and you want to right join, so you want to return everything on the right side of the reservations table and join the guests table on guests ID equal to reservations.guestID. If you will execute this query, you will get the exact same result, but on the other side, because the reservations now in the left and the guests in the right. This is the right table and this is the left table. All right, so let's actually execute that. And indeed, you will find that everything has been flipped to the other side. So the right join actually has returned all the records from the right table and the matched records from the left table. So again, even if no matched records on the left table, it's still going to display all of the records. In our case, this one. Okay, so you see now that the join statement actually joins tables based on columns. But what if we want to join different tables based on rows? For this, we use the union statement. Let me actually create a new database. I will call it football team. Let me use the football team database. And let's create the first table, which will be players. We will have an ID of type integer, not null, and auto increment. We will have the player's name of type varchar, not null, and the joining date of type date, and then the primary key is the ID. All right, pretty straightforward. Let's execute this. Let's refresh. And we will get our players table. Let me also create a second table, which will be called coaches. We will have an ID. We'll have the coach's name, the joining date, and the player ID. All right. And the player ID is going to be the foreign key, which is referencing towards the ID in the players table here. Now let's go ahead and insert some data in the tables. So I want to insert into the players table the name and the joining date. All right, so we have some values: Ronaldo, Rivaldo, Carlos, and Romario. So let's go ahead and execute that. Let's refresh. Let's get the players, the columns. Now we have the ID, name, and joining date. Just let's go ahead and select everything from the players table to display what we have so far. Perfect. All right. And let's do the same with the coaches table. I'm not sure if we have we haven't created the table, the coaches table yet. So let's go ahead and create that table. Let's refresh just to check out. And there we go. Now we have the players and the coaches. And now we can execute the statement to insert the different values inside different columns. Just refresh. Now let's go ahead and select everything from the coaches table. And there we go. Great. So all of that we know already, right? We have seen it before. And the union statement basically displays all the records from different tables together in one table. So here, for instance, in the coaches table, we have the name of the coach, the joining date of the coach, and the player ID, all right, which is the foreign key. We will forget about this now. We just will concentrate on those two columns, right? And also inside the players table, we have the name of the player and the joining date of the player. Let's say that I want to return both players and coaches' names and joining dates in one table. This is exactly what union does. So we're going to, first of all, select the ID, the name, and the joining date from players. And this will do the exact same thing if you will select all from players, right? So if you will do like that and we'll execute, you will get everything from the players table. Likewise, if you will do select ID, name, joining date from coaches, you will execute, you will get also the table with the name and the joining date. So to use the union statement, come here and delete the semicolon, and in between both statements, type union, just like that. Save. Now execute. You will get one big table of all the data from both tables. Ronaldo, Rivaldo, Carlos, Romario, these are the players. The ID is 1, 2, 3, 4, and then starts the other data from the other table, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the names of the coaches. And of course, different joining dates. Okay, so this is basically what the union statement does. It unifies records in one table. You can also aggregate data. So let's say, for example, that we want to return the average years. So for aggregate data, we have different methods, right? We will not take them all. You have count, you have max, you have min, you have sum, and you have the average. So these are the aggregate methods. So you can actually do select average, and you want the average of the joining date, for example. I don't know why you would do that, but yeah, let's say that you need this information from the coaches table. and let's execute the statement, you will get the average for the joining date and a crazy number. All right, you can also group by statement, right? So group by, and this, by the way, an important question that interviewers like or love actually to ask interviewees about. What do you know about group by, the group by statement? All right, and let me show you directly what group by does. It actually groups by data by different columns, right? So let's say that, so first of all, let me just make sure. Okay, so we are actually inside football team. If you're not sure which database is selected, you can just say select database, just to show which is the default database used currently, and indeed it's the football team. All right, so to use the group by, it's very straightforward. You will, let's say you want to select the name from the players table, where the ID is greater than 1, you can execute the statement. You will have the ID more than 1, so you'll have 2, 3, 4. You want the name only, yeah? You can change that by joining date, and you will get here some dates for the IDs more than 1, which means 2, 3, and 4. But let's just return back to be name, okay? All right, so these are the names of the players whose ID is greater than 1. So 2 Rivaldo, 3 Carlos, 4 Romario, right? Pretty straightforward. If you want the first ID, you know that already, so be the first player, Ronaldo. Let's say I want to group the data by the ID. To do that, you will select the name. Also, you want to use the count, right? The count method in the aggregate methods here, it's very much used inside the group by statement. You want to count for each player how many IDs does he have. And normally you will get 1 ID per player, all right? So we want to select the name and the count ID from the players, and now we will use the group by statement, and we want to group them by the ID. All right, let's execute that statement, and indeed you will get for each player only 1 ID. That's not the ID number, but the count of the IDs that each player have. All right, just don't confuse both, because it happens that there might be other attributes where one player can have more than one property or one attribute. Let's take another example. Let's actually use the booking company with the reservations table and the guests table. I want to show you also another example on group by. And here, by the way, you can count not only the ID, right? As we said, you can count the joining date, and you want to group them by the joining date. And you should get also 1, right? 1 joining date per player, right? Pretty logical, pretty straightforward. All right, let's use now the booking company database. Now let's go ahead and select the country code. I want to select the country code, and I want to count the IDs from the guests table. Let's spice it up also a little bit. Let's just add group by. So we're going to group by ID, and we want to order them by name in a descending order. All right, so we're selecting the country code, the ID, and we want to count each ID per country code, and usually we'll get also 1 ID per country code. From the guests, We want to group them by the ID and order by name in a descending order. All right, let's execute that statement. And we will get, as expected, the list of the country codes with the count of the ID. Actually, you can get the name, the country code, count name, count ID, sorry. We want to order by name. So actually, at first, it was not so correct because this should have been country code in a descending order. So let's do that one more time just to show you. All right, now it's in a descending order. P, then I, F, E, and then C. This is a descending. If you will delete the descending, then the default will be ascending, and it should start from C, E, F, I, then P. All right, then let's get back to the name and let's order by name in a descending order, group them by the ID. We have the name, the country code, and the count. And we have our order in the descending fashion or descending style. All right, so this concludes this tutorial. I hope this was useful to you. If you liked it, please like the video, share it with your friends or colleagues. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell. So thank you very much, guys, for joining in again. Keep coding, keep learning, stay humble, help each other, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Take it easy, guys.